instant runoff voting has swept the Twin Cities. Minneapolis will be using the new voting approach next month. The citizens of St. Paul will be voting on whether to go the route Minneapolis has gone. We thought tonight would be a great time to talk a little bit about how IRV would work and whether it makes sense in the saintly city. We have two perspectives. Ellen Brown is with the Better Ballot campaign. That's the group pushing for IRV in St. Paul. Here too is Chuck Repke, an IRV opponent with the No Bad Ballots Committee. Ellen, I'm going to start with you first. What problem is instant runoff voting trying to solve?
The biggest problem from my perspective is that the way the two-round system works now, the two-step system, primary and general, eliminates the opportunity for a lot of voters to vote. The turnout in primaries is extremely low, and in St. Paul, and maybe in Minneapolis, I don't know, the turnout is not at all representative of the full city of St. Paul. It's very skewed towards Caucasians, towards people who are insiders, who are knowledgeable about the political system and so forth. And so instant runoff voting will eliminate the primary, only in nonpartisan races like in the cities, and put all the candidates on the ballot when most voters are at the polls. All the candidates representing all the political voices when most voters being the most representative of the population.
So more participation and then no primary. Actually, Ellen's got a point. This last primary, very low turnout, but 5% in St. Paul. So maybe would this increase participation?
No, actually what happens is that instead you end up with people being discounted in the runoff elections that occur in instant runoff voting. About 15% of the people will only vote for one person. So you really end up with not a majority that voted for any one candidate winning. You end up with a majority of those people who are left still voting instead of a majority of people who went to the polls that day. The process is that with each candidate having about 15% of the people only voting for one, when they're dropped, their votes go away. And my big concern is that when you look at it statistically through the cities that are having it, those tend to be much more in communities of color, in low-income neighborhoods, in the places where you have less sophisticated voters. And when they do their own polling on this, Fair Vote, will say that 83 to 85% of the people understand what they were doing. Well, to me, that's a bad thing. When 15% of the public don't know what they're doing, that's bad for democracy, and it's bad for people's voting franchises. People should know what they're doing when they go to vote.
Now, viewers, of course, are maybe scratching their heads thinking that sounds pretty confusing. We're talking about ranking candidates.
Right.
It does sound confusing, and oftentimes people just given choices, maybe there's too many choices. I mean, some people can't even deal with yes and no.
Well, true. Although we do rank things all the time, whether it's what we're going to eat in a restaurant, if what we want is sold out, if our first choice is sold out, then we go to our second choice. If we're at the video store and the movie that we wanted isn't there, we go to our second choice. We rank things all the time. The point that I want to really respond to that Chuck raised is he suggests that because a few voters only rank one candidate, and thus if that candidate gets dropped out, their ballot doesn't count anymore. The average in the cities that are using IRV now is about 90 to 95% of the people who voted in the first round are still voting if there's subsequent rounds before a candidate is finally elected with a majority of the people voting in that round. In the primary, 70 to 75% of the people who vote in the general don't vote in the primary. I'd rather have 93% of the people who do vote in the general still voting in the final round rather than have 70 to 75% of the people not voting in the primary.
See, but that's the silliness of this. I mean, they're basically saying that it's okay, or it's not okay if you don't go to the primary. It's not okay that you don't go to the primary. That you've chosen to wait until you could actually examine the final two candidates that are left. If you make that choice, that's a bad choice. But instead, we're going to give you a system that's confusing and complicated, and if you, because of that, don't believe that there's any possibility that candidate B and C would be the final scenario, you lose, you don't get a vote. The difference between going to an ice cream shop to buy an ice cream cone, and if they don't have chocolate, I then get to pick something else. The problem in this system is that I don't know when I go to the ice cream shop that they don't have chocolate, so I order chocolate. They don't have chocolate, and I get nothing. And that's the voting system that they're trying to instill, because the voters, I always use Burlington, Vermont as my favorite example. The last candidate dropped off was the Democrat. 18% of his voters had no second choice. Why did they have no second choice? Because they didn't imagine the scenario occurring that there would be the Green and the Republican. They expect the voter to be sophisticated enough to know that that's going to occur when they go into the voting booth. So I say to everybody that's watching Almanac, I know they'll figure out IRV. They'll learn how to rank it. What I'm saying to you is think about those other people out there. Think about somebody beyond yourself and be concerned about their ability to keep their franchise.
There's a lot of issues here, and Ellen, I'm wondering about this. Spoiled ballots. Wouldn't that be a huge problem under this?
It has not been a problem at all in the cities that are using it. In the Burlington race that Chuck mentioned, there were 0 spoiled ballots. There was 1 spoiled ballot, I think it was in Tacoma, Washington. There's always less than, I think, 0.6% is the highest number of spoiled ballots. There aren't spoiled ballots. And if a person chooses not to rank multiple candidates and their candidate loses, their candidate would have lost if it had been a one-round race, if it hadn't been instant runoff voting. If they voted for a loser, they voted for a loser, and that's what happens to them.
Except in St. Paul, if you, right now, and we watched it happen in Minneapolis, they were successfully able to make Green Party candidates. Green Party candidates are now the 2-party candidates in Minneapolis. It's Democrats and Green. They build up an organization in a real ballot system where people could go to the polls in September, vote for the Green Party candidate, and when they pushed through to go head-to-head with the Democrat from September to November, it really developed the Green Party. I'll be fascinated to watch to see what happens in Minneapolis now that we no longer have that debate. And two things. I always want to go back to the Minneapolis example. 11 people running for mayor. We have no debates going on between that.
Chuck,
in St. Paul, Eva Eng is now being considered a serious candidate for mayor by virtue of winning that primary. She gets free press. She gets editorial space in the newspaper. That isn't happening in Minneapolis.
There is no credible opposition to Mayor Ryback. He's busy running for governor. He's chosen not to debate. It's not because of instant runoff voting that there isn't a discussion and media coverage and so forth of the Minneapolis race. It's because there's not viable candidates in the race.
I'm curious, would IRV make party endorsement more or less important?
Oh, I don't think it makes much difference at all. People suggest that it's somehow that, I, as someone who does politics in St. Paul, am afraid of the system. I'm not afraid of the system, other than the fact that I think you're going to see more negative campaigning, because the most important thing to do is that you need to identify your opponent, your most significant opponent, as the one that we pack against. We're seeing it in Minneapolis with the incumbents. In St. Paul, I, as a Democrat, I would peg the chamber candidate, call them the enemy, and go get them.
That's where we're going.
We're confident that there'll be less negative campaigning. We've seen less negative campaigning already in Minneapolis in 2 of the wards, 5 and 6, which are especially competitive and especially poisonous, I guess was the word the Minnesota Independents used. It's much calmer, there's much less. Even the incumbents are saying the tone of the campaigns has terribly, dramatically improved.
And St. Paul voters will vote on this fall.
Exactly.
All right.
November 3rd.
I'm going to go over there. Thank you.
Yeah.
Keep discussing. Thanks.